Well, to begin with, to do our planking, we're going to start with the strip planking. This is Western Red Cedar. It's 1.25 inches, or 1 3/8 by 5/8. Here you see it's all been ripped up off the edge of the plank, and now we're going to scarf it to make it a continuous length. It's important to put these scarves so as whenever they go on the boat that they'll be well staggered. You can do quite a number at a time. As you can see, I have a clamping bench here that is very handy. Clamp up quite a few at the same time. When they're dry, we just need to clean up the edges. What I'm doing here is putting masking tape on all the forms to keep the planking from sticking to them. Strip planking will be screwed into these temporarily, and this will make it a lot easier to get the forms out later. So we start on the middle. Best place is usually one of the diagonal lines that are marked on the forms. I usually start in the middle and work towards the shear. It makes it a lot easier when they're all pre-scarfed and long enough to go the full length of the boat. So I just put glue on the transom and on the stem and on the temporary, or rather on the permanent molds. I start off by screwing them with 1.5 inch screws into the temporary forms. And of course these screws will all come out later. Both edges have received glue before this, epoxy resin. Now what I'm doing is drilling a hole vertical through the planking into the adjacent one, a 1/8 hole. Goes right through one plank and halfway into the next one, and then I drive in 1/8 wooden dowels. This keeps it all together until the epoxy is set up. And here I use bronze ring nails to nail it into the shear clamp. I also use the bronze ring nails to nail it to the bulkheads. So there we have the hull all strip planked, ready for the initial fairing. Grinder works good to take off all the glue before you start planing. This is a foam disc with a piece of plywood, 1/8 plywood glued onto it. Trimming off the shear here. I have that line marked about 1/4 inch below the actual shear clamp, at least 1/4 inch, perhaps 1/2 inch. Tidy that up after the boat's turned over. So now this is where we start losing some weight. It's because really the only way to get it fair is to use a hand plane. Plane it in both directions, diagonal, and then fore and aft. It's a good idea, in fact it's important to do all the fairing on the strip planking, because once we move into the 1/8 planking we don't have much to work with. So take your time here and get it nice and fair. You notice I'm wearing a mask. I'm allergic to western red cedar. So what I done there was cut a track. I really don't know if it's necessary, but it sounds good later when you can tell somebody you got so many 100 feet of carbon fibre in your boat. So now we're starting to put on the diagonal planking here. It is of course 1/8, again western red cedar. I lay it on with a minimum of 1 inch between the planks, and then I cut a 2-inch swath between each plank. This saves having to spile each individual plank. Made a little skill saw tool for doing that there. You could use a small router, but I like to use a little skill saw. It's got a guide, and the blade is set 2 inches from the edge of the guide. And then we'll just drop in 2-inch pieces into these parallel slots. Trim off the excess planking down the center line. Be able to use these pieces somewhere else. And then we drop in those 2-inch pieces. This is all dry fitted. They'll all be numbered and removed, and then they'll be glued on permanently with epoxy. Now this is really low tech steaming. Probably a good way to electrocute yourself too. But again, it works. You only have to steam a couple of planks on the bow, so it's not worth setting up a steamer for that. Staple all that in place temporarily until it dries, which only really takes a few hours. Planking doesn't really take that long. Strip planking should be able to do in 4-5 days. Couple of days for fairing, and this diagonal planking should be able to do one side every 2 days. 1 day to fit it and 1 day to glue it on. Now these have all been numbered. I'm going to remove them, keep them in order. Now we put on the thickened epoxy. Put it on the plank and also on the hull. Filler strip goes on first. And I use bronze staples. That way we can leave them in and they won't ever rust. Lots of staples in. We don't want any air bubbles under that planking. I suppose it would be handy if you had somebody else up on top. Make it go a little faster. But you get used to working by yourself and you don't really think about it. Sure keeps you fit, jumping up and down like that. It's nice to get down to the last few planks. This is a fairly messy, tedious job, so it's nice to get it over with. Fortunately, like I say, it doesn't last too long. About a week in total for one layer. Now, the last layer of planking is mahogany. It's spile 4.5 to look like a carvel plank boat. Want to spend a little bit more care here fitting it. There's no fillers between the plank. Each plank has to be carefully fitted to the next one. I use this ladder template in order to do that. As you can see, the planking is already all marked out on the boat. You can do that by measurement, and of course by eye. It's important that the lines look right, particularly at the bow. This is 1/8 sliced Western red cedar. Nice clear stalk. Just set your template on there. Mark it off. And it actually moves pretty fast once you get going. Remove all the little strips, keep them for the next one. Whenever you cut it on the table saw, make sure and leave the line on. That way we've got a little bit to work with here to fit it with. It's a very handy little plane for the job. Well worth the investment. Has a right angle fence as part of the body. So that should fit in pretty good there. May have to do a little bit of trimming. Now is the time to do it. Once we put the glue on there, we don't want to be having to do any fitting. I staple everything through scrap pieces of 1/8 blanking. That way it all comes off easy. See, and that's how this is a very important part. I'm going to go through that over again up in the bow now, where the plank's a little bit more tapered. These are just pine 2x4s, scrap wood, cutting it up into 1/8 strips. This will be used to put the staples through, to put on the last layer of planking, as all the staples need to be removed. So again, I have a little bit of micro balloons mixed in with the resin here to give it the dark colour, so as the glue line won't stand out between the mahogany planking. Cover everything up with plastic, keeps the strips that we're going to put on here from sticking to the planking. And later we just pull these strips off and all the staples will come with them. Some builders use vacuum bagging for this, but working single-handed is pretty well impossible. This method works good. Gives you a lot more control. And of course, back to the planing again. We want this nice and fair before we put the fiberglass cloth on. This is actually a very pleasant job. Get to see the fruits of all your labours at this point. Spend lots of time at this point because this is your last chance to get a fair hull. That's a piece of plywood with 2 handles on it and I think 3 sheets of plywood glued on it. Work diagonally both ways and fore and aft. This is boiling water. What it does, it closes up all the staple holes. If we don't do this, the resin will get into the staple holes and they'll all be darker. This closes them up tight. And finally, machine sand the whole thing with a nice fine paper. This is 6 ounce rather fiberglass cloth. I have it stretched from one end of the boat to the other. I have bungee cords here that hold it, keep the tension on it. Stapled to a strip of wood there. This keeps it from wrinkling whenever we put the resin on. So just pour the resin along the top, and I use a window washing squeegee to spread it over the cloth. And you want to spread it as much as possible, removing all the excess resin. If you don't, the cloth will float on top of the resin and you'll have bulges. So squeegee it on and then squeegee it as dry as you can get it. And that will of course turn completely transparent. You'll never know that there's fiberglass cloth on there. Need to put a pencil line about 2 inches down onto the lower cloth. Allow it to dry overnight, and then this piece goes on. Just run a razor knife along that line and just peel it off. And then of course we're back to our disc sander to just knock the gloss off the resin. And we'll put 3 more coats of resin on top of that cloth, sanding between each layer like that. So this is the big day. Call in the owner, all his friends. So that's the end of building the hull. The next section will cover the fitting out.